"You don't have to eat it outside," Circe said, pushing the container across the counter before the man could refuse. "There's a stool right here. Nobody's using it." The man looked at the stool, then at her. He had the careful eyes of someone who had learned to measure whether an offer was genuine before accepting it. His coat was gray and worn at the elbows, his hands rough in the way of someone who had been living without shelter long enough for the weather to leave its mark. He was not old, maybe early 30s, but something about the way he held himself suggested a person who had recently become unfamiliar to himself. "I don't want to cause trouble," he said quietly. "You're sitting on a stool and eating leftover chicken pasta," Circe said. "The trouble would have to work very hard to find you here." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the beginning of one. He sat down. Circe Millet was 25 years old and had been waitressing at Birchwood Diner since she was 19. The diner sat on the corner of Calloway Street in a town that was neither small enough to be charming nor large enough to be anonymous, and it had been owned for 30 years by a man named Douglas Fenn, who was 68, tired, and had been trying quietly to sell the place for 2 years without success. Circe lived 4 blocks away with her mother, Constance, who had a bad hip and a sharp memory and strong opinions about everything except the things that actually mattered, and who told her daughter regularly that waitressing was temporary. Circe had stopped correcting her. The diner was the most stable thing in her life, and she was not ashamed of that. She fed the man, whose name she didn't ask that first evening, from the kitchen's end-of-day container, cold pasta and half a portion of soup that would have been thrown away in 20 minutes. She set it on the counter with a paper napkin folded into a neat triangle, which she always did for every customer, regardless of circumstance, because her first supervisor had told her it was the one detail that told a person they were expected and welcome. He ate slowly. He didn't look up much. When he finished, he said "thank you" in a voice that meant it in a way people rarely do. "Same time tomorrow," Circe said, already wiping down the counter, "if you need it." He nodded once, then he left. He came back, not just the next day, every evening for 2 weeks, arriving just before closing when the kitchen was winding down. His name, she learned on the 3rd visit, was Mercer Tull. He offered it simply, without elaboration, and she received it the same way. He was 33. He spoke carefully, with the precision of someone educated, and asked questions about the diner with a quiet attentiveness that she found unusual without being able to explain why. "Who owns it?" he asked one evening, watching Douglas Fenn move slowly between the tables, straightening chairs that didn't need straightening. "Douglas," she said. "He's been trying to sell for a while. Nobody's made an offer that worked." Mercer looked at the room, the worn linoleum, the good lighting, the way the regulars sat in the same seats every morning like the place was an extension of their own homes. He looked at it the way Circe had never thought to look at it, which was like something worth calculating. She didn't think much of it at the time. She refilled his coffee and went to check on table 4. What Circe did not know, what almost no one in that town knew, was that Mercer Tull had, until 11 months ago, been the founder of a mid-sized logistics company that he had built and sold for a sum that had made him, by any reasonable measure, set for life. He had not been homeless from poverty. He had been homeless from something harder to name. After the sale closed and the congratulations stopped, and the apartment he'd bought felt like a room he had wandered into by accident, he had simply walked out one day with a bag and kept going. He told himself it was temporary, a reset, a way of remembering who he was underneath the thing he had built. He had been walking for almost a year when he sat down on the stool at Birchwood Diner, and a 25-year-old waitress with flour on her apron pushed a container of leftover pasta across the counter and told him the trouble would have to work very hard to find him there. He hadn't told anyone this. He hadn't planned to. On a Tuesday, 3 weeks after his first visit, Douglas Fenn posted a notice on the diner's front door. "Closing. End of month. Thank you for 30 years." No buyer had come. He was done waiting. Circe read the notice before her shift and stood on the sidewalk for a full minute before going inside.
She served her tables that morning with the same steady attention she always gave, but her jaw was tight and her eyes were too bright, and the regulars noticed without saying anything because they were feeling the same way. Mercer came in that afternoon, unusual for him, who normally came at close. He sat at the counter and read the notice that was also taped to the register. He looked at it for a long time. "How long have you worked here?" he asked Circe. "6 years," she said. "Do you love it?" She looked at him. It was a strange question, the kind nobody asked about a diner job. "I love the people," she said carefully. "I love that it's a place where people come because they want to feel like somewhere is theirs." She paused. "That's worth something, even if it's just a diner." Mercer nodded slowly. He drank his coffee. He left without saying anything else. The next morning, Circe arrived to find Douglas Fenn standing at the door of the diner with an expression she had never seen on him, stunned and careful, the expression of a man holding something fragile. "Someone made an offer. Last night. Full asking price. Cash." Circe stared at him. "Who?" Douglas held out a card, plain white, Mercer Tull. The room tilted slightly. She looked at the card for a long moment, then at Douglas, who was watching her with the knowing look of a man who had lived long enough to recognize the shape of things. "He came in yesterday afternoon?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I called him at 8 in the evening," Douglas said. "He told me he wanted to keep it exactly as it is. Same menu, same hours." A pause. "He asked me to stay on part-time if I wanted, and he asked specifically if you were planning to stay." When Mercer came in that morning, earlier than he had ever come, cleaned up, coat replaced, looking remarkably like himself in a way Circe hadn't previously had the context to understand, she waited until the first rush passed and then stood in front of him at the counter with her arms folded. "You could have told me," she said, not angry, just honest. "I know," he said. He met her eyes without flinching. "I wasn't ready to be that person yet, the one with the answers and the resources. I needed to be the one sitting on the stool first." A pause. "You treated me like a person before you knew anything about me. That's not as common as it should be." Circe was quiet for a moment. The morning light came through the front window the way it always did, falling across the counter in the long, soft way she had watched for 6 years. "My first supervisor told me to always fold the napkin. She said it tells people they're expected." Mercer looked at the napkin in front of him, folded into a neat triangle, exactly as always. "It worked," he said quietly. Kindness doesn't ask who someone was before they sat down. It only asks whether they are hungry now, for food, for warmth, for the simple dignity of being treated as someone who belongs. What you give without calculation has a way of returning to you in forms you never imagined.